Okay, hello and welcome everyone to this event to mark the launch of Professor Leon Tikly's new book. My name is Raphael Mitchell and it's my huge pleasure to welcome our audience not only in Bristol and the UK but around the world. In fact, we've got participants across Africa. Special shout out to our audience in Ghana, Rwanda, South Africa, Zambia, as well as in Canada, USA, India, Belgium, Finland, Norway, etc., all around the world. So this really is a global event for this important book, and I'm really glad to be your host here today. We've got four amazing, talented guests who are going to be speaking, offering four very different perspectives on this book, four different discussants. Robin, if you don't mind, could you show the schedule for today? So here you go. We're going to be after I've introduced this event. We're going to have Leon himself speaking about the book, introducing the book and its his reasons for writing this. Following this, we've got Ziba Noako, who's she's recently completed her PhD here in Bristol, and her research focuses on women's well-being in higher education and post-colonial feminism. She was supervised by Leon as well, so there's a really beautiful symmetry to this, that she's going to be the first discussant on this book. And really look out for her forthcoming research, which is case study of female students' well-being at a Nigerian university, which is great research, which is coming out shortly. After this, we're really lucky to have Hala Lotsiseka, who's a professor and South African National Research Foundation Chair of Global Change and Social Learning Systems. Hala's a colleague of Leon and myself on the GCRF project, Transforming Education for Sustainable Futures, and her work is really at the forefront of research and practice on education for sustainability, social and environmental justice. And Leon's drawn extensively on her work for this book, so it's going to be really great hearing her speak about that. Following that, we're really honoured to have Emily Achesa, who's Senior Education Advisor at Save the Children, and she provides education technical support on programs in Mozambique, Ethiopia and elsewhere in Africa, as well as Afghanistan and further afield. She's centrally concerned with education for disadvantaged groups, including female learners and pastoralists. So we're really lucky to have her practitioner and policy actor perspective today. And finally, we've got Arati Sriprakash, who's a sociologist of education at the University of Cambridge. And I'm really delighted to say she's going to be joining us in the School of Education at the University of Bristol, which is a great loss for Cambridge and a wonderful benefit for us here in Bristol. Her work is centrally concerned with the colonial and racial politics of knowledge production in education. And if you haven't read it yet, you've got to read her book, her article with Leon, and also Sharon Walker, who I think is in the audience here somewhere. Really fantastic article last year called The Erasures of Racism in Education and International Development, Rereading the Global Learning Crisis. So I highly recommend that. We're gonna finish off with her thoughts on the book today. So we're not going to be using slides in today's session. It's really quite conversational in tone. We're going to start with Leon himself first, and then following that, the discussants. There's an opportunity for Q&A. So if you want to speak today or raise questions or comments for the audience or discussants, then you can either direct a message to me in the chat or to everyone in the chat, or you can raise your hand on using Zoom, or alternatively, you can use, and additionally, you can use the Padlet, which Robin is going to display a link to that shortly in the chat function. And this will give you a chance to make a comment or leave a message for posterity there. So as I mentioned earlier, we're recording this. I hope everyone's okay with that. So this is the purpose of that, is so we can share this more widely after the event. So I've said enough, definitely now. I'm going to hand over to Leon, who's going to talk a bit about why he wrote this book and the origins of the book. So please, Leon, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Raphael, and hello, everybody. It's really nice to see everybody here today. Thank you all very much for coming. I really appreciate you being there under these very weird circumstances. I think it's the first virtual book launch that I've ever been to. But I'd just like to say that if you were here in person, I'd like to hug each and every one of you. So anyway, it's lovely to see everybody. And I'd like to thank, yeah, exactly, Hala. And I'd like to thank people. I'd like to start by thanking my wonderful colleagues in SIRE, in our Centre for International Comparative Research and Education at Bristol, who are just so fantastic and such wonderfully supportive, wonderfully inspiring people for organising this event today. I've learned so much being in the centre, but also my family for putting up with such long absences whilst I was actually writing the book. And they did tell me that they missed me. I have to believe them when they say that. I think they did miss me, but anyway, thanks for putting up with all my absence and being grumpy quite a lot as well. And all my relatives in the UK, in South Africa, some of whom are here, have been wonderfully inspiring. And other journeymen, my comrades over many years, my friends, my fellow researchers and my students who've really inspired me on this journey. And also, you know, shout out to the School of Education at Bristol as well for providing some support for this project. I really appreciate that. And, you know, so a little bit about the book, I think, in terms of background. And of course, you know, books are partly biographical. They bring together not just different intellectual ideas, but different stages of one's life. And, you know, I was born into a very political family. My mum's here. Sadly, my father passed away a few months ago in March. Otherwise, I'm sure he would have been here as well. And, you know, it's actually, you know, I owe so much to my parents, who are both really, you know, very politically, socially aware people, but also taught me so much. And, you know, of course, the time when we grew up with me and my siblings, it was a time of tremendous turmoil and change, both in the UK where we were, because my father was a South African exile and my mother's an activist, a peace activist in Scotland. But essentially, you know, during the 60s, 70s, 80s, really turbulent times, both here and in South Africa. And we were very involved in all of that. And then training as a secondary school science teacher and, you know, working in London comprehensives, and then kind of moving to Africa to work at the Solomon Mahlangu Freedom College, which was set up by the African National Congress to cater for the refugees from South Africa following the Soweto uprising in 1976. And, you know, that was a real eye-opener. It was really important because as a teacher of Western science, you know, I was confronted with the realities of rural Tanzania and learners who had been completely denied any access to science and mathematics education under Bantu education. So there was the double kind of whammy of teaching people Western science and then realizing at the same time how profoundly irrelevant lots of it was. So, you know, that was an eye-opener. And then kind of working at the education policy unit at WITS during the transition. And that was formative as well, because, you know, up until then, when I was doing my PhD, of course, you know, good Marxist and, you know, social theorist and, you know, it's all about critique and which is all very well and good. And I hope there's a lot of that reflected in the book. But, you know, what was really apparent from these formative experiences is the need to actually do something about it and to try and make a difference in the world and to try and think about what social environmental justice actually means in practice. And then, you know, working as a researcher, working with wonderful colleagues on the EdQual project, for example, looking at all different areas of the quality of education. And, you know, this is empirically focused research, lots of this work around the curriculum, around teacher education, around textbooks, about school leadership, and the burning language question in Africa. And, you know, I think, so I hope that the book is also infused with those kind of empirical concerns and research evidence, but also, you know, learning to be self-reflexive and humble in the process, realizing that, you know, whatever my background, ultimately I'm a researcher, very privileged researcher based in a northern university, you know, and what the politics of that means, what it means to listen, to work in partnership, to trouble the epistemic foundations of northern-based research, you know. the extent, you know, to also recognize the fallibility of knowledge, of Western knowledge, and the importance of bringing in different voices. And I hope that, you know, I can bring some of that into the work that we're doing at the moment in the Transforming Education for Sustainable Futures Network Plus. And, you know, Raphael, Hela, many of the other people, some of the other people, Tara and others who are involved in the project are in the book launch today. But perhaps, Raphael, you could share the link for that, because what we're really trying to do there is to develop Southern-led research around education for sustainable futures. So we're hoping to trouble the whole development problematic. So you may ask, you know, what this book is actually about. And very briefly, it's probably, maybe I could just very briefly outline some of the key ideas that I think are in the book. But, you know, it starts from really an analysis of what I call the postcolonial condition. And, you know, in that sense, it's about the colonial legacy, but also understanding Africa's continued position on the margins of global economics and politics and culture. And the analysis, I think, needs to have both material and discursive dimensions. So bringing together, you know, structuralist, materialist with kind of post-structuralist concerns. So, you know, at a very material level, of course, it's to do with Africa's position, role as really a source of natural resources and of human resources through the slave trade since the colonial endeavor. And the terrible consequences, not just for human and social development that has wrought, but also for the environment. And, you know, we see that all over the continent, but also the role of, you know, a development in inverted commas and of aid in fostering dependency and actually helping to keep Africa in that position where it's always been since colonial times. How, you know, the position, how the role of the post-colonial state and of indigenous elites in the post-colonial period who, you know, to a large extent have benefited from some of the economics of all of this, but also the importance of struggle, the recognition of different intersecting regimes of inequality, whether they're based on social class, on whether you live in an urban or rural environment, on race, on ethnicity, on language, gender, of course, and so on. And how these are both materially and discursively constituted, but also how there's so much to learn, you know, from previous periods of anti-colonial struggle. And that's really important too. And I hope that comes through in the book, that, you know, we talk about decolonizing the curriculum now, which is great. You know, we're trying to do that in Bristol at the moment. And, you know, of course, it's a really important struggle. We've been inspired by our South African and our African colleagues in leading that struggle. But of course, you know, they're building on generations of struggle against colonialism, against racism, against patriarchy, against empire. So, you know, we need to recognize, and I hope some of that history is also reflected in the book. So, you know, education. Well, you know, education can play a role in creating sustainable futures, I suggest. But actually, I think historically, the place that we're at is we need to recognize its role in unsustainable development, in supporting the very processes we've been describing through, you know, denying the masses of people really access to any kind of meaningful quality education, but also the way that the quality, what we mean by education quality, is still so colonial in its orientation. It's still so elitist, it's still so teacher-centered, it's still so irrelevant to the needs, the aspirations of ordinary people, and of course to the natural environment. So transforming that, education has a role in that, but what I try to argue in the book is that it needs to be quite radically transformed. And I think, you know, part of what we're trying to do in TESEF, in the new Network Plus, is to encourage Southern-based research that can really trouble some of the inherent assumptions in the education system. But also, it really means, on the one hand, moving beyond critique. There's a lot of critique in the book, but I hope that it also begins to point a direction. For example, in relation to the curriculum, the need on the one hand to make sure that there is education for all, that learners do have access to education, but also that the nature of that education is transformed, is decolonized. But also that, teachers, their agency, I think in lots of development discourses, they're seen as part of the problem. Deficit models of teachers are found everywhere. And we need to challenge that. We need to recognize the importance of releasing the enormous energy, the potential, the agency of teachers as agents of change, who can work across the boundaries of the institution into communities, to recognize the role of education in informal settings, of leaders of social movements, and the important educative role that they can play in social learning, and try to bring these together. And it's not easy challenging the kind of the hold that neoliberal agendas have, that privatization has on the continent, that benefit the few rather than the many, that create incoherence in the system when there needs to be coherence. That really riles against the principles of education as a public good, which is essential if we're going to rebuild and reconstruct education. But to recognize that change is a complex process. And those of you who have engaged the book will see that I've drawn on complexity theory and thinking as well, because it allows us to think of systems, but as complex systems cut across by these regimes of inequality. So it's really, a critical take on complexity theory, really. Understanding the complexities of change, that at a political level, it requires just on the one hand, a double movement, linking education to processes of democracy within countries empower the most marginalized social groups, but also, enabling, linking education to processes of, an African Renaissance that can begin to redress Africa's marginal position in the world and a global hegemonic order. So I'll stop there because, I think, I've said quite a lot. I hope I've given you a sense, a flavor of the impetus behind the book, both personal and intellectual. And back over to you, Raphael.
Thank you, Leon. And we'll have Leon back in a while to respond to some questions and from the audience. What you're seeing on your screen now is a Padlet, which Robin is displaying. This the link to this is in the chat history, and this is an opportunity for you to leave some comments or questions or anything you want in relation to the book as it emerges through the course of this session. But I'm delighted now to hand over, as I say, to Dr. Ziva Nwako, who's coming to us from Bristol, and she's going to be our first discussant to give her perspectives on the book. So take it away, Ziva. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Leon, for the introduction. It gives me great honor to be part of this because, as Raphael said earlier, Leon is still my supervisor. And so I'm happy to have the opportunity to talk with him about this new book. My comments are going to focus on the transformative agenda, which actually comes at the end of the book. That's the final chapter. So I think we'll be going backwards today. And Leon presents two key arguments in that chapter. One of them about the importance of building a counter-hegemonic movement. And he says this is given that change is political and ethical. He mentioned that a few minutes ago. How do we build this movement? By building coalitions, he says, between states and civil societies. He highlighted civil societies as those concerned with environmental justice, women's groups and women's rights, and disability rights as well. And then secondly, the second argument, he mentioned the need for strong indigenous systems leadership ones that are committed to overcoming dependency on foreign assistance in education. Now, that struck me, that bit, because Leon is smiling, he knows why. Because I found from my research that when we talk about foreign assistance in education, and talking about this in post-colonial countries, if you like, there's been a kind of shift I found towards what has been masked as globalization. So rather than it being colonization or coloniality or colonialism, we're now talking about globalization. And so we have, for example, what we call in Africa, China aid. So we have the Chinese institutions, Confucius institutions, which are springing up everywhere. And I particularly found that this seems to go against what Leon is advocating for, you know, for the transformation of education. If we're going to be heading towards strengthening indigenous knowledge systems, then surely we should be looking into African systems, African indigenous systems, you know, knowledge systems, and African, if you like, education or forms of learning. Part of which I would argue may include learning from as it happened in pre-colonial times, because I believe that pre-colonial education was more involved with community learning and, you know, passing on history and stories from generation to generation, and then fathers and mothers teaching children how to, you know, behave in society or how to become skilled in work areas. So I would like to ask you, Leon, what you think the benefits, involvement, or implications for the groups you mentioned, the civil society groups, would be when you say, when you talk about democratizing the governance of education. So what would be the role of these groups? What do you think they would, what do you think they have to offer to education systems as they are now, and how would their role and how would their role contribute to transforming education systems in Africa? It's a question.
Do you want Leon to answer that question now?
Yes, please. Yes.
Put him on the spot. Yeah, please, Leon.
Yes. Okay. Well. Thanks, Ziba. So it's a really good question. So you're talking about the role of marginalized groups in democratizing education.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. So I think, you know, it's really important. I mean, I think what we've learned is that education is a major site of struggle historically against colonialism on the continent, you know. And, you know, that there are lessons to be learned there about how students, educators organize, how they mobilize, how they try to change their institutions from within and from without, how they work at an institutional level with communities, you know, that they try to democratize, you know, work to democratize the governance of education more broadly, to allow indigenous voices into discussions about what should be in the curriculum and so on. And, you know, there are very real examples of that on the continent. But, you know, in your own work, Ziba, you highlight almost the micro struggles that people also undertake. You know, in your case, the important role that women students, female students can play in identifying and trying to transform the situation that they find themselves in. So I think it's a question that operates at a number of scales, you know, from the national right down to the individual.
Okay, thank you. And then when you talked about foreign aid as well, foreign assistance in education, as I said earlier, that really struck me because, you know, we find that is happening a lot in Africa, and I don't know how, given the political, if you like, political, you know, structures we have in Africa. I'll speak for Nigeria, for example, given the political structures where we seem to think that some parts of Africa are still developing, and therefore we need help and we need aid, you know, and we see it, I spoke about it recently. We see it even on TV, where you see, you know, adverts of, you know, poor little children who are hungry and all that. And, you know, these are children who presumably are out of school anyway. So like you said earlier, education may be able to play a part. But how do you think we could overcome this aid mentality that we seem to have? Or, you know, how do you think we could stop or prevent this foreign assistance that we seem to think we need in Africa?
So to begin with, I should say that I'm not against the idea of foreign assistance per se. I think that there are ways of assisting, you know, people who are living in dire poverty and people, you know, but I think it needs to nurture the seeds of local leadership. That's the thing. And the problem is that the way that aid has been constructed, it has been really conditional. So it's forced governments, communities to do things, you know, to become neoliberal agents really in processes of change, rather than, you know, actually building on indigenous movements and ideas and perspectives and impetus for change. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I think, you know, aid. So I think aid really, you know, has a role to play, but it needs to be itself transformed. And I think, you know, there are discussions about this going on all the time. Mm. But I think, you know, you're right in identifying that, you know, Chinese assistance to Africa is also, you know, problematic. It's supposed to be a win-win situation, but ultimately what Chinese and Western aid tends to do is continue to put Africa in a position of being a source of natural resources.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Leon.
Thank you so much, Ziba and Leon, for that. We're going to hand over to Hala now. Hala, as I say, is coming over from South Africa. And we've got to speak. We had to move the order around because where Hala is, there's power shedding at the moment. So the power could go off any moment. So I'm very eager to hear from Hala's perspective now. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Raphael. And thank you very much, Leon and Ziba, for opening up. Thank you very much for inviting me to do this. I am one person who just completely loves books. So when I get asked to read a book, and Leon so kindly gave me a copy of his book, I of course read it on the airplane coming back, and I've read it again. And I really love this book. And I want to just start by thanking Leon for writing the book. And it is what I would call, I have categorizations for books, and this one I would call a big book. And a big book is a book that is so rich and it has so much in it that you can spend probably many, many years working with this book in so many different ways. And so it's very difficult to, you know, spend only 10 minutes on it. So I'm going to try to just go into conversation with it a little bit. And I think when I first came across Leon's work, I had an interest like him in the meaning of quality education in Africa. And I think it's still a project that we all need to share, because we need to think about what quality education has come to mean, but more importantly, what it needs to mean. And by that, I mean what it needs to mean to the people on the continent of Africa, because it has meanings, but they're not necessarily the meanings that people need or want or even like. And I can put myself in that space. I grew up in apartheid South Africa and actually hated education. The meaning of quality was not one that I could relate to at all. And yet I was supposed to be at a very good school and all of that kind of stuff. So, you know, this is I think what lies at the heart of this book is a commitment to placing ontology and ethics at the heart of education system reform. And this, I think, has got profound implications for education all over the world, but importantly so, very much so in Africa today. So when I read your book, Leon, I felt like I was walking across my bookshelf, like here and there. And if I could show you my office, you'll see it's got thousands of books. And I felt myself walking across this office and just taking a book out here and there, and all of them finding themselves in your book. So there's something shared beyond the book itself, but a kind of an intellectual and history that's related to a project of transformation in education, which stems, I think, from just coming to understand the pernicious effects of oppression in education. I think you had that history, and I also had it, not the same history necessarily, but moving in the same direction, I think, ultimately. So I think there's a synergy actually in, you know, striving for transformative pedagogy and praxis, and trying to look what it means for more sustainable, just future for people. So there's something of that in the reading of the book. And I think it stems actually from an understanding of the underbelly of apartheid and what it did to people, you know, in and through education in all kinds of ways, when it didn't need to do that. It was one of the major kind of horrible effects and long-lasting effects of coloniality and apartheid is the impact of miseducating people. Purposefully miseducating people and not giving them the opportunity to discover the beauty and the strength of what education can be for life and for living. So yeah, I think the second kind of connection point is really in the work of curriculum and pedagogy. And I think in the early post-apartheid days, I got involved in post-apartheid curriculum, and have traveled so many of the stories that are written about in the book, you know, the shifts in intellectual work from the earlier sort of commitment to transformative idealism to coming to understand the complexities of knowledge and pedagogy and teachers and the agency of teachers and the issues of language. And I think we've all been learning what transformative education actually ought to be. And I don't think we really fully know that yet. I think we're only beginning to almost touch the edges of it. So it's kind of weird that I'm thinking about all of this when we now kind of, in those days it was a state of emergency, and now we're in a state of national disaster. And it feels to me almost equally traumatic, but also potentially creative in the same sort of essence as what's sitting in this book, is that sort of history of trauma, and also the potential creativity that can just burst from the seams of the book and the words in the book and the directions the book is busy opening up for us. So yeah, today we were listening, Raphael was with me on the platform. 80.5 million children in Africa have not been able to go to school for the past few months. The parents we found in all of our research across the 8 themes are stressed and anxious, and people's livelihoods are dropping or destroyed, and life seems to be more precarious than it was at the beginning of the year, which is really tough, because the beginning of the year wasn't necessarily a good time for people anyway, you know. So I feel like I think this book is very much needed, and I think it is because we do need to very urgently develop new imaginaries for education. So we need these richer set of tools, we need more intellectual work to help us navigate these possibilities. And I think there's so much in this book that can just, as I say, you know, it's one of those that can like burst the banks and let us move, you know, which I think is a fantastic work for a book. So I really like this, because I think the book works with theory in relation to context. It doesn't proffer theory for other people, but it leaves the platform richly textured. It leaves it open for uptake, for deliberation, for movement with and beyond what is offered there. And then the thing I love a lot about it too, Leon, is that it's so meticulous. It's so carefully researched and carefully put together. And I really like that a lot about it. It's just so awesome to find a book like that for, especially if you're like me and you're working with many students and you just say, guys, here's a book. It's got, I've already shared it with, you know, a few of my students who are preparing proposals for PhDs and so on for the NRF. I said, here's this section, look at that. And, you know, it's one of those books that one can really do a lot of work with. So what I like a lot about the book too, and I think this is where I want to come into a bit of a conversation with you on it, is the commitment to social and ecological justice as a foundation or as a very important part of education. And it reminded me of the early days of environmental education, where we worked on the political, the social, the ecological, and the economic relations to the world around land and water pollution, loss of biodiversity, structural adjustment impacts, developmental logic that was gone wrong. I remember we were talking in those early days about, you know, the crocodile kind of logic of development, which was people were trying to work against. And the long politics of coloniality that was built, as you said just now, on the control of resource flows, you know, and the exploitation of people. And that's still exactly the case today. You know, we see that in extractivist literatures and practices, but most insidiously, I think, in the colonization of the mind, you know, and the abyssal thinking that, of course, you open up also with D'Souza Santos's work, which is so useful, such nice work. I like it a lot as well. Yeah, so, and then I think there's other things that come through for me, particularly the way that you try to resolve some of these very unhelpful binaries. Like, and it made me think about Bhaskar and also Mamdani, who make the point that the production of the binary actually produces so much insidious, unnecessary trouble for us, you know. So we have these binaries that have built modernity, which are theory and practice, indigenous and scientific knowledge, black and white, that's produced racism, and the underdeveloped binary that, you know, Harry Truman somehow imagined in 1949. And look what that's done, you know. So I think if we can think more strongly about working on these boundaries, I'm not saying just, you know, conflate them or destroy them, but work on them, like nature, culture, bifurcation. What a disaster of a binary, you know, we can see it today. So, and that I think is where work in this book, and it's something to just keep working with you on and talking about is, you know, how do we outline some of these useful bifurcations and dualisms, and then what do we put in the project to resolve binaries? And there is creativity, I think, and your point about the generativity of our research. So that's lots that I'd love to keep talking about. I have many questions, and especially I think questions about how do we get more praxis in this theoretical project? How do we build that? So I think that's what I wanted to say mostly. And just maybe to end with a question that the young people asked us today at the end of the seminar, and they said, oh yeah, there's so many recommendations and so many papers, and, you know, what happens to them and what do we do with them? And where are the leverage points for the transformative praxis? And I feel like there's, you know, such a huge long question for the next probably 30 or 40 years for us all. In that question that those young people were asking us. So yeah, so I'm very, very happy to be working up this project actually with you and with your team. What it's going to look like, I think, be very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Raphael. Thanks, Leon. I don't know if you want to.
Thank you, Hala. I don't know, Leon. Do you want to respond to any of Hala's points now?
Just very briefly, because I'm conscious that other people need to talk, but just to say that, you know, your work, Hala, has been hugely informative for my own thinking, and it was really interesting kind of in writing the book, kind of coming across your work and just seeing so many parallel ideas on critical realism and education quality and capability. But actually, you know, you gave me a way of seeing, as somebody that's been involved in the environmental movement, a way of articulating those links between environmental and social justice. So, you know, I thank you for those comments, and I think it's, you know, I'm really glad that we're working together on this project. I think in relation to your students' question, it's a really good one. What is the point? And of course, the thing about complex change is that it's multi-causal, multi-dimensional. But I think at a very profound level, it depends on leadership. But by leadership, I don't mean top-down leadership. I mean grassroots activism and leadership that can link in, hopefully, with change at the top as well.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that. To be continued.
We've got many years to keep talking. That was really nice. Thank you, Leon, for inviting me to do this. I enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Hala, for your contribution. We're going to open up for some questions and or comments from the audience. In a minute, Robin is going to be displaying on your screens the Padlet, which people have been feeding into. But we've already got one question, Leon, which I'm going to pose to you now from Melissa, from our old student Melissa, who I think is in Jamaica at the moment. Hey, Melissa. Melissa's, the rest of you do drop a message in, any questions in the comments section. You can direct that to me or to the room in general. But Melissa's question, Leon, relates to the Caribbean context. So she says, you know, the issues and challenges in terms of policy and practice, which we've been discussing in this book, are specifically in the African context and coming from African perspectives. But in the title of your book, you talk about this more broadly, the post-colonial condition, the post-colonial world. And so Melissa is wondering the extent to which insights from this book can relate to education in the Caribbean. So that's her question for you.
Do you want me to answer it now? Okay, first of all, hi, Melissa. It's nice to reconnect with you again. You know, I appreciate your deep interest in these issues and your own scholarship and ideas. I think, you know, what I've tried to get away from in this book is that although it's a focus on Africa, the old way that we compartmentalize the world and see it as consisting of different ontological realities, whether that's the global north or the global south. And of course, you know, one of the great contributions of Pan-Africanist thought, and I think my colleague William Acker is in the room somewhere, but he's written a lot about this, you know, it has been around the diaspora and thinking about how racism, for example, coloniality, processes of racial formation, you know, have really, you know, applied to people across the diaspora. How colonial education systems have had similar effects in downgrading and undermining indigenous thoughts, languages, cultures of people in the Caribbean as elsewhere, but also the tremendous connections there as well between the Caribbean and Africa, and that's borne out as well in struggle. It's borne out in the writings of Walter Rodney, of C.L.R. James, of Stuart Hall, of some of the great Caribbean social theorists who have really helped us shed light on the post-colonial condition. So I see it as very interconnected, part of the same ontological reality.
Thank you, Leon. So if you've got any questions or comments from the audience, you can also raise your hand if you want to speak in person to the room. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. Okay, all right. So in fact, there's another opportunity for Q&A later on. So let's move on to our next guest, our next discussant, and I'm delighted to welcome here Emily Achesa, who's coming from Save the Children, who's going to offer her perspective on Leon's book now.
Thank you, Raphael, and thank you everyone for attending this forum. I just want to confirm that I've looked and read thoroughly at some of the sections of Leon Tikly's book on education for sustainable development in post-colonial world towards a transformative agenda for Africa. And I'm so pleased that he's written a book that really has a lot of content and is rich in looking at Africa, all the way from colonial to post-colonial to current times, and trying to compare how all that leads to what we are doing today. I must congratulate Leon for writing such a relevant book to the current times and reflecting on the past, post, present, throughout the colonial period to the globalization agenda, and for identifying the root causes and issues that are holding the education agenda in Africa and the deep-rooted nature of unsustainable development on the continent, and for proposing some very viable transformative approaches and agendas that we heard from the previous speakers from a theoretical perspective, but also from a practical perspective. It gives me the sense that he wrote this book deeply with a great intention to let the cat out of the bag and make sure that all the issues that are holding Africa back are addressed, and we look at the root causes. In Africa, we have a saying that if you want to uproot a problem, you have to go back to the root and pull out all the roots for you to understand what the problem is. And the fact that he has also constantly told us that he's recognizing that Africa is not a homogeneous continent with a view of the post-colonial state, and that he understands that and he knows there are common issues that are arising within Africa. And I love that about the book, that he's not just lumping Africa as one huge continent. So having reviewed the book, I've looked at the book apart, other than the other people, from a practitioner's perspective, from an African woman working in the global level with an international organization. And I've also focused on areas of particular intellectual and programming and advocacy and personal interest for me. And of interest has been a specific chapter on the book in chapter 6, where Leon goes back and really looks at the regional and the national governance of education in Africa. And here, three things actually pop out for me in the book. And I don't want to give spoilers, but I just want to share with you what hit me as somebody who does a lot of programming with various colleagues. The first thing that hits me is that we are working in a very fragmented arena, where he says the fragmented nature of education and training in Africa is one of the issues that we need to address. There's a plethora of players, as I could see when I was reading that section and reading the book in itself. Players influencing education agendas at regional and national level. However, when you look at these players, there are very many strategies coming up, like at the regional level, the Continental Education Strategy, the Agenda 2063, the Common Action Plans, but with conditionalities of aid and diluting, they seem to dilute the ownership of these strategies and the will to implement the strategies and the agendas at the national level. And he also brings in another angle of the soft power of the rising powers, similar like the China powers and existing powers from the West, and how they influence and they also fund the agendas that come up with, and to some extent also contributing to writing these agendas. And he feels that these are externally driven reform agendas, taking us to the dependency trap. And at the national level, he argues that this mirrors the same thing, where we find CSOs are also contradictory in relationship to the state, but they're also having a legitimatory function with the state. And this is a problem because the civil society itself is weak at the regional level, but also very patchy at the national level. And that's where there's a gap. And the oxygen comes in and the global platform kind of bypasses some of the regional plans that are made and influences the agenda both at the national and the regional level. So there are so many of these players. Historically, I like the way he looks back at the colonial time and analyzes how all the different players were influencing education and also intentions in the state, and at times not being a threat to the state, starting with teacher unions, looking at the paid demands, but transitioning to democratization agendas, religious institutions being mediator sponsors, but moving to become opposition in some countries like Kenya, where he quotes social movements, which he says are very rich in Africa, and he quotes a few in South Africa, Tanzania, and other countries. NGOs, which started as marginal, ignored by the state, but now are repackaged, private sector and foundations and all that, and how they're influencing the agenda right now. And when I look at all these players, being somebody who works in that arena in practice, I realize that as a practitioner, this book is going to be so valuable, first of all, in understanding the entire field of education before we even start programming, because in a way, as programmers and practitioners, we could contribute to exacerbating the issues that Leon is trying to raise in this book. And then the second issue is the capacity, the capacity deficiencies, because throughout he says how all these things are happening with the CSO nascent, the state is nascent, there are bloodlines between the state and the CSO. There's a lot of over-reliance on experts to help them write the strategies, consultants, donors, externals, to influence and to fund all this. And my question for him in terms of capacity is, has he looked at any research or data that proves that the capacity in some of these state organizations is weak, or and versus the issue of trust and letting the other engage in terms of defining the agenda? The last bit is the filtering down, not of the regional agendas. Yes, the agendas are written, there's some form of consultation, but they are largely influenced again by the external. And he sees them as aspirational, and there's an expectation that they'll be implemented, but they are not. So they don't filter down to the national level. My question is, what does he see as the role of children, for example, because I work with a children's organization, in influencing this agenda? As we know, he's quoted a lot of historical happenings, and I know that, for example, in South Africa, June 16th, they are praising it was all about decolonizing education, or children pushing back on the education they were getting and the quality. And we do emphasize in the book that the state sometimes settles for the access agenda at the expense of the quality because they want the political gains. How can we move this to that level through the transformative agenda that you're giving us? Because everybody is talking that talk of transformative agenda, but we need to see the action in reality, not only in academic research, but also in policy making in the global arena. And all relies on the issue of trust, relinquishing the power and relinquishing, deconstructing the structures that you so well approve here. And then the other thing is, where do you see the whole digital push right now? Because I feel this book has come at the right time, the relevant time, when we're talking about Black Lives Matter. We're talking about COVID-19, where the entire education system has been shut down. There's a crisis, a lot is happening. This is a window of opportunity to deconstruct the whole education system in Africa and build it properly. But the campaign that is going around is Build Back Better. And I like what you have written in your book towards the end. I think you've called it Build, I wrote it somewhere, so that, Build a Better Future. So using what you've outlined in the analysis in this book, I think you're at a very good position to influence the global agenda, not to build back on what you have outlined in these colonial structures and post-colonial, the continued inequalities, but to build a better future for our children, our girls and boys. Thank you, and congratulations for a job well done.
Thank you very much, Emily. I really appreciate that. Raphael, shall I respond now?
Yes, yeah, you can. Yeah, you've got.
Okay, just very briefly, because I'm a bit conscious of time. And Emily, I hope we can have a chance to engage with these important issues. And, you know, it's very humbling to have your perspective, because both as an African woman, but also as a practitioner on the continent, you know, and we should, as academics, be learning from you rather than the other way around, I feel. But, you know, I think, you know, the role of children is a really interesting one in struggle. And of course, you know, youth, the category of youth has a special place in struggle in Africa, because over the generations, the youth have played a really important role. I remember, you know, in the ANC Youth League, there was a poster, quite a famous poster of a soldier, an MK soldier, Mkontowe Sizwe, which was the armed wing of the African National Congress. But she had a rifle over one shoulder and a book in the other hand. And, you know, so that was always the message that, you know, the youth have a role in struggle, in transforming, getting involved in struggle, but also, you know, critically in learning. And this point goes back to Gramsci, you know, that actually our children need to learn. They need to access the powerful knowledge in the curriculum if they're going to transform it and change it in their own right as the next generation of intellectuals. But, you know, you also asked the question then, how do we change the agenda to focus on quality? And I think that's a really burning one. I'm not sure that I have all of the answers. I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say. But I do think that it fundamentally involves going beyond the very limiting idea of the knowledge economy, of 21st century skills, of human capital theory, and beginning to really flesh out what an indigenous view of what a good quality education should be. I think there's a very important role for African-based intellectuals in doing that work, and practitioners critically.
Thank you. Okay, sorry, Emily, did you want to come back on that?
No, I'm happy. I'll follow up with Leon as well, because there's a lot that we can't say in 10 minutes, but there's a lot. And just to let Leon know that I've used some of the arguments in some meetings I had yesterday, and I felt very intellectual. Good. It's a good book.
That's great to hear. Thank you, Emily. And that's really wonderful to hear that it's of use in meetings in the decision-making forums as well already. Okay, so we're going to have some time for Q&A after the next speaker, but first of all, it's my pleasure to introduce Arati Sriprakash, who's going to give her views on the text. And as I say, do leave any questions or comments in the chat function, and then we'll pick those up afterwards. Thanks a lot, Arati.
Thanks, Raphael. I just want to start by thanking Leon, the organisers, and the other speakers for this opportunity to be part of this amazing celebration. Leon, it really is an honour. You know, your work has been an inspiration for so many of us. I'm sure everyone here today will be joining me in acknowledging that. I came across your work as a student. Your paper on education and new imperialism blew my mind. I continue to teach it to every cohort I think that I've had since as a teacher. And similarly, this book is inspiring new foundational shifts in our way of thinking about education and international development, much like your other work. So, you know, I think what we're seeing here in this book is you continuing to break new ground. But I also wanted to say that, you know, that there would be many people here today who would know you not just for your amazing scholarship, but you as a person. And there's two things I think that we know you for, Leon, and that is your humility, but also your real commitment, your genuine commitment to dialogue. And your friends and collaborators here would be sure to recognize that. And actually, this is actually really relevant for how I think that you've approached your book, how the book presents its analysis. Because if you think about it, if we saw another book that had on its cover towards a transformative agenda, and if it was written by somebody else, you might expect it to be filled with hubris or perhaps prescription. But this book is not filled with hubris or prescription. It is a careful meditation, a reflection, really reflecting on your humility of complex problems. And it is indeed oriented towards dialogue because of its commitment to bringing into conversation a vast and complex field of literature, history, and practice. And indeed, I think as we've heard from others today, complexity is at the heart of the book. From the outset, it seeks to address the complex systems of development from economic, social, environmental domains. You talk about governance systems and the regimes of inequality, the natural ecological systems, as well as knowing systems, which are, as you know, of particular interest to me. So it's a book that is far from reductive or simplistic in its analysis. And indeed, Hala was talking that it was very much going beyond binary thinking, something that is urgently important, I think, for our field. But in doing this, in naming this complexity and in trying to grapple with its complexity, I think what the book also does at the same time is put forward a very lucid project and argument. And as I've read the argument, it is this, that unsustainable development is deeply rooted in enduring relations of coloniality. And so you're arguing here that a transformative agenda for Africa, one that works towards social and environmental justice, must be one that interrogates and undoes colonial and racialized assumptions and hierarchies. And of course, how is this done? Because it's not just about critique. We have here some thoughts, some imaginations for moving forward. And again, I think reflecting, Leon, on your own commitment to collective, collaborative community building, your centering on the need for coalitions, I thought was really powerful across this text. And I think, again, Ziba mentioned this, the coming together of policymakers, practitioners, teachers, activists, and academics to struggle over this agenda for transformation. The idea of transformation isn't something that's settled. It's not an object that has already been determined. It's an ongoing process. And in fact, key to that is democratizing the development agenda. So what I really appreciated in Leon's analysis, for those who haven't managed to get their hands on a copy of it yet, is that this agenda for transformation isn't approached in a flat technocratic way. Leon doesn't take on this idea that change is going to occur through a flat technocratic undertaking, but rather he acknowledges that it's going to have to be a process that is alive to the complex regimes of inequality that he actually maps out through the book. He argues that a transformative agenda must be a counter-hegemonic movement. So at its core, this book refuses the idea of development as, being, in the words of James Ferguson, an anti-politics machine. And as such, we're asked to confront together the complex politics that Leon has so carefully mapped out, rather than turn away from it. And I think the difficulty of this project is also the honesty of it. So I wanted to thank Leon for putting together such an honest and difficult, necessarily difficult book. So thank you, Leon. I think, you know, we've all been asked to present some questions for discussion to Leon and to the panel. Actually, one of my questions has actually been brought up in the chat by William Acker about knowledge, knowledge politics. So maybe if I could, I don't know, Raphael, if rather than me ask this, a very similar question, we might as well ask that one, because I think it'd be nice to hear from other people.
Yeah, sorry. So William Acker's question. This was also my question as well. But yeah, so what William Acker asked was, he says this sounds like a very rich text, and he looks forward to reading it. He says, I recognise the importance of indigenous knowledge sources as a means of dealing with colonial legacies, but I wonder, how do we assess the value of indigenous knowledge? Is there a danger in seeing this as a romantic panacea, and how do we navigate this space?
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent question. So first of all, Arathi, thank you very much for those very generous and thoughtful words, and you know, for leading us into these questions as well, which I think are really important. So I think William raises you know, a really important question: how do you evaluate indigenous knowledge? Is there a problem that we romanticize it? And you know, that's something that we want to do in the TESF project, in that we want to work with indigenous and other groups to bring indigenous knowledge systems into conversation with Western knowledge systems. And I think, you know, the value of that is that, you know, when we're talking about sustainability, when we're talking about human beings' relationship with each other, but also with the natural world, there's a lot that we can learn from indigenous knowledge systems. But I think there's a real danger of treating them romantically and not seeing them historically and by the same token, not understanding that Western knowledge systems also are indigenous in the sense that they come from a place, you know, they're rooted in Western thought. So I think, you know, it's important to understand that, you know, that they're not ideal, that you can have, you know, they generate their own forms of patriarchy, which again is something that Ziba has pointed out in her work, for example, you know, so it's really closely linked in, I think, with the democratization of knowledge. And I think lots of this goes back to the politics of knowledge production. To what extent, you know, are we genuine about bringing these different knowledge systems into conversation with each other within the academy? But also, you know, to what extent do we work with indigenous communities in an engaged but also in a critical way in the process of transforming knowledge systems? And of course, you know, the idea should really be thinking in relational ways about how to solve the real world problems of Africa and drawing on these different kinds of knowledge systems. I see Simon's saying the move to thinking more relationally about our relationships to others and to nature feels an important move for the field, albeit something many other cultures already knew. So I think there's a lot to be learned, but I think it's about the politics of knowledge production and processes of critical engagement.
Thank you. We've had some other questions come through. And Leon, perhaps you could read these through in the chat as well as I'm introducing the next question. But the next one comes from Julia. And Julia just wanted to, she says, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how this book pushes against the banks, to use Haylor's great image, of comparative and international education.
Well, I think, I'm not sure, you know, I haven't really reflected on that. I mean, I've always found these kind of pigeonholes quite problematic in some senses, but I think as a field in international comparative education, I think perhaps one thing that the book does is that it tries to break down boundaries. So it tries to, for example, I think, you know, often we're still working within the developing binary. And I really hope the book begins to seriously challenge that as a way of thinking about the world. Because of course, what it does is that it prevents us from seeing the globe, our world, as one ontological reality, as one place that we all share and that we all need to take responsibility for. And, you know, rather than us in the global north leading development in the global south, it should actually be about us developing globally towards sustainable futures. So I hope that it helps to trouble some of those traditional boundaries in international comparative education, but also, you know, as Arathi's work has done, you know, to really build on what Arathi and Julia and others have done, is to trouble some of the epistemic assumptions, you know, at the heart of the field as well, about what counts as powerful knowledge, as important knowledge in the field.
Thanks, Leon. Another question to come in. Daniel Kiereku is wondering whether Africa isn't too diverse and fragmented to have a single transformative agenda as a whole. And beyond slogans and taglines of education for all, the sustainable development goals, etc., how do we make sure real change takes place in classrooms?
Yeah, well, first of all, hi Daniel. I'm really glad you could make it to this event, and I would expect such a critical question from you, my friend. So it's a very good question, and of course, you know, neoliberalism does create a homogenous agenda. You know, conditional lending from the 1980s, structural adjustment created an homogenous agenda. You know, in the period immediately following the liberation of many African countries from colonialism, there were hugely diverse growth path solutions to Africa's problems that were indigenously rooted. So, you know, if you read Julius Nyerere, he spoke about, you know, from a Pan-Africanist perspective, but very much rooted in the realities of East Africa and Tanzania. And the same with you know, Kwame Nkrumah. You know, so I think what neoliberalism did is that it flattened that out. It hollowed out that indigenous leadership, those ideas that of course were rooted in the local reality. And it's that we need to recapture. And I think relating to the second part of your question, you know, it's very much about releasing the agency at a grassroots level if we're talking about education systems. You know, if you read a typical World Bank report or DFID report, teachers are a problem. They're perceived as holding back progress. You know, communities are seen as a problem. The role of communities in education is to pay fees, essentially, and to hold teachers, incompetent teachers, to account. But, you know, what a shallow, what a homogenizing, what a impoverished view of change at any level. You know, so it's the same thing. It's about releasing that agency, that leadership, you know, and that means investing in our educators as agents of change. They're the ones who can lead change at a community level.
Thank you, Leon. We're just flashing over to the Padlet now with, please, Robin. This is just a reminder that we've got this separate space where we can continue the conversation beyond this event this evening to give your feedback on the book and thoughts for your comments on this and any questions as well. And just really to get in touch with Leon and others on this book. there's some more questions filtering through. So, it's not a question exactly, but Njeri is saying it's interesting. She notes that it's interesting to note that indigenous knowledge systems are largely oral, and how to structure formal engagement with conventional academia is worth reflecting on. Like how do you incorporate oral wisdom, which is conveyed through like metaphor, symbolism, and different formats, including creative and performative arts? I wonder if you've got any response to that, Leon.
Well, it's hugely challenging. I mean, I wonder if the speaker would like to reflect on that herself. But I mean, just to say that, you know, I think this idea of transdisciplinarity is important. That, you know, it's not easy. I think it's partly a question of methodology, you know, and allowing spaces for different kinds of expression, you know, different methodologies that are able to capture, you know, the wealth of oral traditions as much as they are able to quantify numbers and do statistics. So it's partly about methodology but also about partnership working, which I know is something you're passionate about, Raphael, how one conceives of research projects, who conceptualizes them, you know. So one of the things we're hoping to do in TESF is to actually encourage, you know, in Southern-led research, including research from indigenous groups. But it's not easy, and I'm not sure that we have the answers to those questions at the moment. I'm filled with both excitement and dread at, you know, the 80+ projects that we're hoping to fund that I hope will help to illustrate how this can be done. Not an easy task.
Yeah, thanks, Leon. I just want to extend Jerry's question there as well. Like, so you in the book you draw this distinction between indigenous knowledge systems and indigenous knowledge, like in terms of artifacts, cultures, practices, etc. And like I've seen plenty of examples of this being incorporated into classroom practice in Ethiopia, for example, which is the country in the region I'm most familiar with. But what I haven't seen exactly is this incorporated into what are still largely Eurocentric assessment systems. And I just wondered if you've got any kind of concrete examples or of where this has occurred.
Yeah, no, it's really it's a really good question, you know, and I think unfortunately, you know, it hasn't been particularly prevalent on the continent. South Africa is the only country that I know of where indigenous knowledge systems are actually reflected in curriculum statements, you know, as being important, but then they're not reflected in assessments either. So, you know, but I think it's a highly complex question. I think, you know, it's not a simplistic solution of just simply incorporating ideas from indigenous knowledge systems, because then you're taking away, you're not treating indigenous knowledge as a system. And also, I think, you know, the danger is then immediately it becomes subsumed within dominant Western ways of knowing and understanding. There's a huge job to be done. If one looks at other parts of the world, in, say, China, for example, you know, it's possible to do a degree, a PhD in Chinese medicine, you know, as an indigenous knowledge system. Colonialism didn't have the same devastating effects on knowledge systems there, in the sense that they were able to preserve knowledge systems. And I think part of it is also related to language. I think, you know, the undermining of African languages, which are the key to understanding indigenous knowledge systems, have also been undermined. So I think there's an enormous job of work to be done, but it's not something that is just to do with education. It's to do with wider processes. What extent are indigenous languages valued? What extent, you know, you know, are we able to resist the law of 21st century skills and the World Bank types of agendas and, support African academics, researchers, scholars to develop indigenous knowledge systems.
Thank you, Leon. And we've actually got a follow-up from Najeri, who's raised her hand. I think I'm unmuting you. No, I haven't done that. Apologies, I don't think I'm able to do that. Yes. Any other comments? And well taken, Leon. Your point about China, and I guess India as well would be another one, wouldn't it, with the Ayurvedic tradition as well? Okay. Okay. Sorry. This is
Hi, Raphael.
In the last 10 minutes. Here's Najeri. Here.
Thank you. Apologies for the technical issues there. I'm connecting in from Cape Town. I'm the senior futurist for the Institute for Futures Research, Stellenbosch University. Thank you very much for the enriching conversation and for picking up my question. Just to note the query from Andy as well, and I guess I'm speaking about traditional indigenous knowledge systems in Africa. And I think, Raphael, you picked up my point very well. It's very much around the ranking and how to, assess them in a way that's speaking to Akesh's question as well, in a way that has them recognized within formal ranking systems and speaks therefore to the issue of quality as well. Around methodology, we do have practices such as, action learning and, experiential learning that I think speak well to indigenous knowledge systems and how they are conveyed. But it's very much around lifelong learning, and speaking from the Futures Institute, we're interested around research questions that look at how can we engage in these transformative, systemic changes that would be deeply rooted across different sectors, from quantity and quality to ranking, to curriculum, to conveying. So for instance, the fact that the current focus on STEM in higher education minimizes the role of the arts is something that's also interesting to consider. But thank you very much for these questions. I look forward to reading the book.
Thank you, Njeri. The work of the Centre sounds fascinating. I'd like to visit you one day.
Please do. We're at Stellenbosch University on the Belvin campus.
That's perfect. And I just wanted to point out as well that TESF will, as Leon mentioned earlier, will be funding research projects in South Africa, Rwanda, Somalia, Somaliland, and India as well. So if this is interested, or if you or your professional contacts have any working in those areas, do please follow us. You can follow us online on Twitter or via the website, which I shared earlier. Yes, to get funding and also other opportunities to work in this area. We've got a few minutes left. Does anyone else have a final burning question? If so, please raise your hand, and we've got time to take, I think, one more question.
So I think Hala and Zeb and others have pointed out, the important contribution of Boaventura de Sousa Santos's ideas, the ecologies of knowledges, which he links very much to the struggle against what he calls epistemicide, the destruction of indigenous knowledge systems. But also he relates it very much to the role of the university as a public good, solving real world problems that need to bring into conversation different kinds of knowledge systems.
So one final question here. I think this is the final question. This has got to be, and it's from Tigist, and sorry, no, it's from Andy Smart. And he says, fully agree RE teachers as agents of change, but did you not also describe teacher-centered pedagogy as undesirable? Ooh, this is a can of worms right in the last 2 minutes. Oh, my word, it's coming up. We've got this.
I really think, to put it briefly, I just think that it's again, it's one of those, you know, false dichotomies, because I think, you know, I think what's critical is bringing the learner's prior experience, knowledge, into conversation with dominant, powerful knowledge in the curriculum, and the role of the teacher in mediating that. And I think to see it as either learner-centered or teacher-centered is not particularly helpful. I think what's more important is actually respecting and understanding better what works in African classrooms, not in a World Bank sense of conducting randomized control trials, but of being humble and realizing that actually teachers facing very challenging, difficult delivery contexts have actually developed forms of pedagogy that allow these interactions to take place. So I would say that it's very much a job for practitioners in Africa themselves to lead us on in terms of what works, and an important role for the academy in supporting them and understanding it.
Thank you, Leon. And thank you, everyone. Thank you to our guests, Ziba, and to Hala and Emily and Arati. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here. And of course, also to Leon, the man of the day, Leon, with his fantastic book, which we've very much enjoyed. Before we go, we are going to go now because it's 6:30 and you've all got homes to go to. But before we go, can you just turn on your video if you're still there and still listening? Because we just want to like kind of see everyone's beautiful faces and get a snapshot.
And I think Leon deserves a round of applause, don't you?
And can I take this opportunity to thank from the bottom of my heart all of the panelists and everybody who's asked questions today, and everybody who's come here to attend, and especially to you, Raphael, for chairing the session so wonderfully well. So thank you.
Thank you, Leon. And yeah, take care, everyone. Stay well, stay healthy, and see you next time.